Have you ever believed that the powerful always win, until a single moment shows you how wrong that belief can be? There is a strange comfort in thinking that world leaders, presidents, ministers, and monarchs exist far beyond the reach of consequences. And yet, history whispers a different truth. Those who insult a nation built on faith, resilience, and quiet dignity often face endings far colder than the words they once spoke. Especially when that nation is the Philippines. For decades, the world repeated the same tired lines, as if reciting a script written by people who never stepped foot in Manila, Cebu, or Davao. They're just a small country. They don't matter geopolitically. They're only good for cheap labor. It was said lightly, casually, almost with a smirk, as if an entire people, warm, hard-working, faithful, could be compressed into a punchline. And then came the whispers. You've heard them. We all have. Even world leaders say it. Even ministers laugh about it. There is something dangerous about the illusion that the entire world has already agreed on a lie, because when enough people repeat it, it begins to sound like truth, until something shatters it. What if I told you one of the most respected European ministers once stood before cameras, mocked the strength of the Philippine military, and declared that the nation would collapse in a week, if ever challenged? It was a careless remark, almost a joke, almost a sneer. And what if I told you that months later, his own political career collapsed in disgrace, while the very military he mocked was being praised internationally for bravery, discipline, and peacekeeping excellence? These stories, 5 of them, are not just political tales. They are human stories, stories of arrogance undone, stories of nations underestimated, stories of leaders who insulted the Philippines only to face endings they never expected. But more than that, these stories reveal something deeper about the Filipino soul that the world too often overlooks. Compassion that softens the harshest hearts, resilience that confuses oppressors, and a quiet faith that unsettles those who rely only on power. Our journey begins with a man named Viktor, a senior political advisor from Central Europe, groomed by elite universities, surrounded by diplomats, polished in every way a Western statesman is expected to be. He was brilliant, yes, admired, yes. But he carried within him a certain coldness, a belief that small countries remain small forever, that developing nations must always stay beneath the heel of those who claim superiority. To Viktor, the Philippines was nothing more than a name in a briefing folder, a country of storms, exports, and domestic workers. He had never visited, never met a Filipino family, never stepped inside a Filipino church echoing with songs of hope. But that never stopped him from speaking with authority. Viktor had always believed that strength was measured by the size of a nation's armies, the height of its buildings, the steel in its economy. Weakness, to him, was something you could calculate on paper. But life has a way of erasing those neat lines with a single stroke, and for Viktor, that stroke arrived quietly. Diagnosis first, consequences later. An illness he had ignored for months suddenly tightened around him like an invisible hand, stealing breath, clarity, and certainty. He had access to Europe's finest hospitals, yet somehow each visit left him feeling smaller, more forgotten, more alone. Have you ever watched a powerful man shrink without anyone noticing? That was Viktor, a man who once spoke with the confidence of nations now sitting in waiting rooms where no one remembered his title. Specialists gave him timelines. Surgeons offered procedures with low success rates, and the same institutions he once praised for being models of the West began to fail him in ways he never expected. A bed was unavailable. A doctor was out of country. An operation was delayed due to policy changes. And each delay pulled him deeper into the darkness he didn't know how to navigate. He sought treatment elsewhere, Germany, Japan, even private clinics in the United States. Every country promised, then redirected him. He had money, yes, but money could only buy time, not certainty. And certainty was slipping through his fingers like sand. One night, after an exhausting series of consultations, he sat in a dim hotel room in Tokyo, staring out the window at a city blazing with neon lights. He felt no comfort from the brightness. It only reminded him of how small a human life becomes when stripped of power. He whispered a question into the dark, a question he never would have allowed himself to imagine months earlier. Where do I go now? There was no answer, not then. Only exhaustion, only hopelessness, only the weight of knowing he was running out of options. And then, unexpectedly, the first thread of hope emerged from a place he never would have considered. It happened during a routine follow-up in a small clinic where the attending physician, a soft-spoken woman with warm eyes, noticed the way Viktor struggled to hide his pain. She wasn't European. She wasn't Japanese. Her accent, gentle and familiar to so many around the world, gave her identity away even before she said it proudly. I'm from the Philippines. She examined him with a level of care he was no longer accustomed to. She asked questions others skipped. She listened, really listened, when he described the fog of confusion and fear settling over him. And at the end of the consultation, she spoke softly, as though she were offering more than medical advice. You need specialists who consider not just your illness, but you. There are doctors in Manila who do this. Viktor did not decide quickly. Men like him rarely do. Pride holds them by the throat, whispering that accepting help from a place they once belittled is equal to defeat. But illness has a strange way of stripping away illusions. And so, one morning, after another night of coughing and another letter from a European hospital postponing his treatment yet again, he found himself staring at a simple email drafted by trembling hands. Requesting consultation in Manila. 24 hours later, he received a reply. Not from an assistant, not from an automated system, but from a Filipino doctor personally. The message was warm, reassuring, almost familial. It didn't speak to him as an official, but as a human being in need. And for Viktor, that alone felt like a miracle. His flight to Manila was quiet. He sat by the window, watching clouds drift like slow-moving waves, feeling the weight of his past arrogance. What does a man think about when he flies toward a country he once insulted? For Viktor, it was uncertainty, yet also a strange sense of surrender. He was going somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere he had never cared to understand. And that vulnerability scared him more than his illness. When the plane touched down at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, he expected chaos. He expected noise, disorganization, confusion. But what greeted him instead was something he could not explain. Warmth. Real warmth. From the airport staff guiding him with patient smiles, to the driver holding a sign with his misspelled name, apologizing profusely with sincerity that disarmed him. It wasn't perfection he felt. It was humanity. His first day at the Manila hospital was nothing short of eye-opening. The lobby wasn't as grand as the ones in Germany or Tokyo. The equipment didn't gleam with sterile intimidation. But every nurse, every doctor he encountered carried something he had not seen elsewhere. A deep, almost spiritual kindness. They called him Sir, but not out of formality, out of care. They asked about his sleep, his appetite, his pain. They placed a hand on his shoulder when he struggled to stand. Their eyes were full of concern, not calculation. One moment struck him harder than he expected. During his first diagnostic exam, the young nurse beside him noticed the way his breathing tightened. She didn't rush him. She didn't grow impatient. Instead, she whispered, "It's okay, sir. We're here. You're safe." Something about those words, so simple, so sincere, pierced through the armor he had carried his entire life. He found himself swallowing a lump in his throat. Later that afternoon, he walked slowly through the hospital garden. Patients were praying. Each day that followed drew Viktor deeper into a reality he never knew he needed. The hospital became less of a medical facility and more of a sanctuary, a place where walls echoed with laughter even in the presence of pain, where nurses hummed hymns under their breath, and where families prayed before every small procedure as though God himself were seated beside them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the man who once saw the Philippines as insignificant began to see it as something profoundly sacred. His treatment was rigorous, but the compassion wrapped around every step made it feel lighter. When he struggled through physical therapy, the therapists encouraged him with patience rather than pressure. When he faltered during a procedure, a nurse held his hand longer than protocol required. When the nights grew difficult and fear crept into his chest, someone, always someone, would knock softly on his door just to check if he needed water or company. They didn't need to. They simply chose to. One night, he awoke breathless, panic gripping him. The machines beeped a frantic rhythm as he gasped for air, clutching at nothing. Before he could even call out, 2 nurses rushed in, their faces calm, their voices steady. One guided his breathing with gentle whispers, while the other pressed a cold cloth to his forehead. He saw concern, yes, but also tenderness, something he hadn't seen in months of Western medical care. When the episode passed, the younger nurse remained at his bedside. "You're doing well, sir," she said softly. "You're not alone." Not alone. The words echoed through his chest with surprising force. For so long he had been alone, in power, in illness, in fear. He had walked boardrooms with admirers, but never friends. And here, in a country he once dismissed, he was learning what it meant to be cared for without agenda, without calculation, without expecting anything in return. And it wasn't just the hospital. During his weeks of treatment, Viktor began to step beyond its gates. Manila was loud, imperfect, unpredictable, but it was alive in a way he had forgotten how to feel. He wandered through small cafes where strangers greeted him with curiosity instead of suspicion. He watched families share meals that overflowed with laughter despite having so little. He observed jeepney drivers joking with passengers as if everyone belonged to one enormous family. Everywhere he turned, he encountered kindness that felt effortless, natural, woven into the spirit of the people. One day, an elderly woman selling rosaries outside it. By the time Viktor completed his final round of treatment, he no longer counted time by medical charts or pain levels. Instead, he measured it by the people who had carried him through the darkest months of his life. The nurses who always remembered his favorite tea, the doctor who prayed silently before every major procedure, the security guard who greeted him every morning as if welcoming back an old friend, the hospital cleaner who asked about his family back in Europe, as though she were part of it. Every day, strangers had wrapped him in kindness so profound that it transformed him more deeply than any medicine ever could. On his last week in Manila, Viktor found himself walking through the hospital garden one final time. The sun was warm, almost golden, as though blessing him for everything he had learned here. He paused beneath the same tree where he once felt terrified and uncertain. Now, he felt something entirely different, a sense of peace he could neither explain nor deny. It was as if the Philippines had lent him a new heart, one stronger and gentler than the one he arrived with. He thought about the man he used to be, the advisor who mocked nations he did not understand, who hid behind statistics and policies, who believed compassion was a luxury instead of a necessity. That man felt distant now, almost like a shadow he had finally stepped out of. The Philippines did not just help him survive. It taught him how to live again. On his last evening before flying home, Viktor stood in a small chapel inside the hospital. A quiet mass was taking place, the kind that fills a room not with grandeur, but with sincerity. Families prayed with clasped hands. Nurses bowed their heads in gratitude after long shifts. A young man lit candles for a mother recovering upstairs. And Viktor, without planning to, found himself stepping forward to light one as well. He whispered a simple prayer. Not for power, not for status, not for recovery, but for gratitude. Gratitude for the people who healed him. Gratitude for the country that embraced him. Gratitude for the lesson he never expected to learn. Humility. When he stood, he noticed an elderly Filipino man smiling gently at him. "You will carry this with you," the man said softly, as if stating a fact of nature. "Once the Philippines touches you, it never leaves." Viktor felt the truth of those words settle deep within him. Back in Europe, people asked him what happened during his disappearance from the political scene. They expected bitterness, disappointment, perhaps embarrassment. But what they heard instead was something entirely